this is Debbie Reynolds, and I have Pamela Gupta here, and this is the monthly installment of the Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Fix, where we talk about issues in technology and law as they relate to privacy and cybersecurity. I hope I said that right. So, Pamela, how are you today?
I'm very good, Debbie. How are you?
I'm excellent, excellent. So, we're always talking about emerging things. I think both of us are really interested in kind of modernity and what's coming up next. So there was an article that I shared and that we talked about a bit, and I think I did a video about it a couple months ago, which is about emotional AI. So how AI systems are trying to use emotions. This is pretty controversial, I
Right.
guess, and we can kind of talk about that. So I think the issue is, and I think we talked about this, and I think this is a thread that we talk about a lot, which is having computers infer things about people, and whether, first of all, is it accurate or not, and then what happens as a result of that, like what actions either the computer takes or a human takes as a result of that. Is that the right way to explain it?
Yeah. So, what we talk definitely. So, a face scanning algorithm, for example. Um, for example, just let's take a look at a use case. They are being used for hiring tools. Um, you might have heard of a company called HireVue, and what they're doing is they're scanning using computer vision, scanning image and applying effective AI on top of that to interpret the emotions that they are seeing on the from the images. Now that is called well, you can call it emotional AI, for example. But the problem is that this is not something that has been perfected. And the article that Debbie, you were talking about was that this particular gentleman took a view of doing an analysis of the emotions that people are exhibiting and did a kind of a consensus across different cultures and found that there was no consensus across different cultures on what different facial expressions were. And this is in the analog world. So when you take something like that and put it into a digital world and in a face recognition or a related app and then applying interpretation to it, it's clearly not a well established science yet. And in doing that for purposes such as for hiring tools, such as HireVue I was talking about, or for other applications, then that becomes a big problem because you're taking something that is not hasn't been flushed out yet and taking really critical or important decisions based on that. So I'll give you a few more examples, Debbie. But did that answer what you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so one of the well, the different areas that this is being already being rolled out in, and as with anything with some of the problems we've seen with algorithmic failures in AI, the system's been rolled out, then people realize their problems, and then there is some reluctance or some protests against it, and things have been rolled back. So there are numerous examples. But what I want to talk about very briefly before I turn it back to you is that employment, as I mentioned, has seen a real surge of what is called affect recognition. And what they're doing is they're taking these photographs, these images, and seeing not only and videos also, and seeing are people smiling too much? Are they suitable for a particular job based on how much they're smiling, for example? And contrary to opinion, what you one would expect. For example, how have you found that if people were smiling too much, they may not be a good fit for a particular job? So, so these are the kind of things that we have to be cognizant of. Um, Another part, another application rather, another area of application for affect recognition has been in criminal justice. So police in the US and UK are using certain software. One of them is called Converus. It's the eye detection software, and what that does is it examines eye movements and changes in pupil size to flag potential deception. Again, that is this is not has not been perfected. So in order to, if the area of application is something like law enforcement, for example, then you can imagine that there are significant repercussions if it's not well honed technology. One last example I will give, though, is from in Hong Kong customs. They have applied facial recognition, including motion detection, and they're doing analysis of video stills and images captured by drones, and they're using to identify potential known terrorists. So we have to, I think, do two things. One is be aware of where all this technology is being used. And secondly, realize that this is not well mature technology. So that can carry its own risks.
Right. What you point on, this is a huge problem, right? And unfortunately, people don't think of it this way. And so, anything, especially having to do with your face or biometrics, there can be tremendous harm to the individual, and the harm can be different. So, let's say uh, for example, let's say in the food industry. So let's say there was like a E. coli outbreak or something, and someone said, "Well, we're gonna, 50 people got sick because they ate lettuce from this state, and we're gonna recall it." That's something that people jump on because the harm is similar, right? But in
Right.
AI, the harm can be different. You may have 50 people who are damaged by AI in different ways. So because they're different, there isn't as much of an outcry. Maybe someone got denied for a loan, or were searched in customs, or they didn't get into a university. So the
Right.
harm can be really great. And then also, the big problem here, and I see this a lot, is that companies that create these technologies want to sell them, right? So they'll say almost anything to sell their technology. And then it's also incumbent upon the company that's using it to be able to use it correctly. But as you said, these are not proven things. My friend in New Zealand, Rohan, he likes to call it making stuff up, which is, you know, someone is making, it's like a detrimental inference that is being made about in a person. And as I said in previous videos, inference can be extraordinarily harmful because it may not be true. So I'll give you another example that you didn't mention, that I've run across, which is the use of facial recognition or emotional recognition in education. So, as so many kids are working from home, or
Right.
doing homeschooling, some of these technologies have recognition patterns to say, when Johnny does math, he doesn't look happy. So maybe that
Mm.
will change a teacher to say, the teachers want to get good raises, right? They want to get good ratings for their teaching. So maybe they say, if we think that Johnny isn't happy doing math, maybe we'll give him a less stringent um, course or session. Or maybe we'll have him bake cakes, do home economics, something that makes him happy, which makes the teacher look better, but it doesn't really help the student. So that's another reason behind emotional and affect being problematic. And then, for me as a woman of color, let's say for instance someone says, well, we're going to check if this person's blushing. Like, how would you know that I was blushing because my skin is dark? You know what I'm saying? So being able to think about those things and the potential harms that it can wreak on people is problematic. Many years ago, I saw, I don't know if Microsoft is still doing this thing, but they were playing around with facial recognition. And I actually saw um, they had a thing, it was kind of like um, it's not a kiosk, but basically they have these cameras up and you pass by and it tries to tell how old you are and uh,
Oh,
what race you are. And then I noticed that it has something about your happiness, whether you're happy, you're sad, or something like that. And I always wonder, I'm like, why did they do that? Like, that seems kind of crazy, but now I can see that a lot of these companies are trying to make that a feature. And for example, let's say someone can have an expression that looks like they're happy and they're not. Maybe they're in pain, or you can cry and be happy. So, and people are different. So just because someone's eyes move a certain way and you think, oh, someone looks up, that means they're lying. That's not true. Especially people who are able to control their facial expressions in a way that you
right.
can't make it out. So I think, you know, in order to be able to use this, I personally don't think that emotional recognition should be used in situations like anything that has a detrimental effect or will have people take actions against someone in a negative sense, because you just don't know. Like you were saying, there was an incident where there was a facial recognition camera used on a drone for someone, and uh, and this drone was a weapon, right? So they were looking for a particular person. The facial recognition software said that this was this person, and that person was killed as a result of that. And they found out after the fact that it wasn't the right person. So I feel like, we can't abdicate our human responsibility to a computer or AI, because they don't have the judgment of an individual or a human.
Yeah, I just did a talk the other day on regulations, and I was talking about how we in it's a two-pronged approach that we need for building the right trust in AI. As you know, I'm very very much a big proponent of advancing trust in AI. And one of the talks that I gave recently was in order to build trust in AI, making sure that we trust the outcomes, we have to build these systems in the right fashion, and security and privacy being one of them. But those are not the only facets. These are very complex systems. So, in order to take something that has not been fully vetted and perfected and applying it to areas such as emotional detection, and using that for hiring decisions or police purposes, like I mentioned, that is problematic in its own right. But also, in addition to building these systems correctly, we rely on things such as regulations, and that was a talk actually. My talk focused on why we need regulations, well thought out regulations, not just knee jerk reactions. So Congress, for example, they have had many in the U.S. many hearings on facial recognition to pass a regulation. And it has become an issue in the 2020 election, as had become an issue in the 2020 election, as we know. Well, so what is the solution, right? What is the problem? What is the solution? The problem, as I see it, is even if these systems are built securely and with privacy, and we have full confidence in them, it's still a snapshot in time. We have to make sure that we keep validating that these results are accurate. Okay, because this is not a one-time build system like a conventional system. But the problem is we're not even at that phase yet. We're not even at that state where we can have full confidence in how these systems are producing recommendations or outcomes, and we are rolling that out into mainstream society and taking big decisions based on that. That's one problem. The other is how can we use regulations to protect us from these actions, and that's something that let me just that is another fact that we need to kind of focus on, right? If the end result is what we want is protection from these systems that are not fully baked, right? And the other is reliance and trust in their outcomes, where we know that if they are saying something, then this can be something that we can rely on to make a decision. So one is, are they built securely, and the other is, or properly. Let's just say properly as a very broad umbrella of if we can trust these systems. Even then, what I'm saying is we need to validate, do we have the right results on an ongoing basis? But we are not at that point yet, and they are already being rolled out, is problem, as I see it.
Right. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head about that. So I think this has to be an iterative process where you're always validating and checking and changing. It can't be a one shot deal. And unfortunately, a lot of these things are being rolled out now without kind of a framework or without regulation. The problem here is, I guess it's a two-pronged problem. One is, unfortunately, a lot of regulation doesn't happen until the harm happens. So it's kind
Right,
of reactive to a harm
right,
where this can be catastrophic before there's ever any laws passed. So we have to find ways at a design level to be able to try to prevent or curb the harms, or be able to have diverse people in who are smart, right, in different areas, to be able to say, let's do this and not that. I'm hoping to see more companies go into having people evaluate their AI systems. Unfortunately, I would not, what's what I'm looking for, I wish that any company using AI or building AI would have someone who could audit, the AI systems. So,
right.
regardless of whether it was the law made you do it or not, I think there's an obligation here, uh, an ethical obligation. So, a lot of times, some companies are like, well, I'm only going to do what's legal, right? And they don't look at the ethics, or they should look at the ethics, because ethics, unfortunately, not all laws are ethical. So there's a responsibility there that I think not all companies look at, which is, I'm rolling out, whether they're creating the AI or whether they're using it. There are situations where, like you said, people using AI in hiring. So actually, Illinois is one of the first states to have a law about that, using, video interviewing and using AI tactics to try to tell people's emotions and different things. So they want to make sure that that process is transparent to individuals, and that they aren't doing things that cause harm to individuals. But part of that is having a human in that process. So
Right,
not having a computer this turn down an applicant based on what they say. Maybe
right.
having a human verify that result in some way, and make sure this tied to real accurate truth, not just an assumption, or not just an inference or connection that a computer made.
Right, and I think because we all suffer from not having enough time, right? That is why if you have a million applicants who are applying, then you're trying to narrow down the field. I personally feel that even having a human in the loop in this case may or may not still have those intended outcomes just because they've already narrowed down the field based on AI systems, right? Now, out of those ones that they have selected, now you have the human make the final selection, let's say. But they've already eliminated folks that might have made the cut, you know.
Right.
So I think, given the complexity of the system, this is just my opinion, that you have to perfect, make sure that you have trust in the system. Without that,
Right.
you don't know. You can't be taking, you have to validate the results. And you can only have trust if you have a validation process. Okay. So what you're saying is correct, right? You have a human in the loop. But what I'm saying is have a human in the loop along the whole process till the process is fully meshed out. Okay. That's one thing. The other thing is audit. Having done security my whole life, right, and created security programs, and I have always built a very good relationship with the audit team because you can play tag team with the auditors, making sure that they are your boots on the ground, making sure that the security program you have laid out that is being implemented is being fully understood across the organization. But the problem with audit is also it's a snapshot in time, right? And even though there are multiple companies out there who are auditing algorithms right now, the very nature of these systems, though, it's not sufficient to make sure that the you have full trust in the results that are coming out of the system because of the very fact that so let's take an example for a deep learning system, for example, or a machine learning system. These systems evolve constantly. They're learning from the data and they're evolving. So even if you audit the algorithm, the fact that they are evolving, they are will have different results. Okay, and you can't always know what is the mechanism or what is the criteria they're using to come up with a certain solution. So what the data was fed in a week ago and the data that was fed in today can have different outcomes because the system is learning. So auditing is important, but these are really complex systems and we really need a robust development around these systems to really make sure that we have trust. And this is not like your DevSecOps of the prior the previous systems for developing secure applications, for example. This is a different beast, and it requires a different approach. And that is something I had talked about in the past, or a governance process, or that I had created called the SPIT framework, but I'm actually thinking about revising the name from spit because spit is like has a derogatory connotation to
Mhm.
tip, just turning. So security, privacy, integrity, and transparency, but switching it around so it's transparency, integrity, privacy, and security for AI systems.
Oh, I like it. I
So
like it. Yeah, I don't know. The emotional AI track is something that I'm not a fan of in general
right,
because I just don't think, people are, there isn't, in my opinion, there isn't a universality to
right,
people's reaction or how you can read their face. That doesn't mean anything. Someone who's smiling doesn't mean that they're happy. So,
yes,
someone's facial whatever that may not tell you much of anything about what their emotions are. So, being having systems target and then take negative action against someone based on what a computer assumes is wrong. I mean, it's not correct. So
right,
basically, you're creating data sets that are incorrect or you can't even validate, because how would you know that a person is sad, or how would you know that they're happy? You know,
Right.
some of the most gregarious people that you've ever met are depressed, but how would you know that? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Right.
just, I don't know, I wouldn't call it quackery, but I don't think that there is, you know, the premise that someone's facial expression has a direct correlation to how they're feeling. I think that's a false.
I agree with you, Debbie. I
Yeah,
think I agree with you because certain cultures, smiling is not associated with happiness.
right.
It's associated with either being nervous. And I don't want to go into too much of that because it may have a negative connotation, but I do know of a culture where smiling is associated actually with being nervous. But one thing if there is an area where we can use effective AI, it would be for monitoring alertness. So it's
Right.
not necessarily for emotions, but for how alert a person is. So, for example, if you're driving and if your eyes start drooping, then that is something that can be again honed down and perfected the system so that it doesn't have false positives, and can be used for in autonomous driving, for example, or driverless, because the autonomous driving has different levels. But those are the kind of applications where this can serve a purpose, a good purpose, where even if it's a false positive, so somebody is falling, looks like they're falling asleep while they're driving, and
Hmm.
a alert mechanism. So even if it's a false mechanism, even if they were not falling asleep and you have an alert mechanism, it's still not, it doesn't have any bad results. Okay.
Yeah. I
So
think,
those are the kind of applications where I see.
yeah. But I think what you're talking about is very specific, and I don't associate that with emotion, right? So
No.
it's basically, you know, the road is ahead of you, and if your eyes are looking somewhere else and you're driving a vehicle or doing something that can harm someone else, absolutely. Yeah, why
Right.
not? You know, I think that's, you know,
Right.
you know, on my car, I have like a lane thing where it tells me whether I'm in the lane or not. And it gives me like a green or a red, you know, if I'm like getting out of the lane. So being able to track, especially in an autonomous vehicle situation, you know, we're seeing, unfortunately, people do things by, you know, trying to get into a Tesla and not be in the driver's seat. So, you know, if you're not in the driver's seat, I don't think they can tell whether you're obviously not alert because you're not able to take action if something goes wrong with the car. But yeah, I think those uses are fine, but I
Right.
still just, you know, I never thought that either. So, you know, like I read these articles about, you know, and I know that they do this where like an FBI agent, they try to read your emotion or your, you know, are you nervous? Are you this or that? And some people just aren't. They can't be read in that way. So, assuming
Right.
that everyone, you know, maybe someone's sweating because they're hot, not because they're nervous. You know what I'm saying? You know, so trying to correlate that to emotion, I think is just it's a false premise to start with. So then you start building things onto it that just don't make any sense. So I'm not a fan of
No,
the
I'm not
emotional
either.
thing. Yeah. So
I'm not either. I don't think, in summary, I would say as a technology, it's not ready yet. And also as a science, it's not something that we can take and put it into a AI system where, because of the facts that we just talked about, that there may not be a cross-cultural consensus on interpreting emotions, and to use that for determining important facts, that's just not, we're not there, and maybe we don't want to be there.
right.
There,
I
there.
agree with that. I agree with that. Well, this is a great discussion. I'm sure a lot of people really enjoy this one. Yeah, this concerns me greatly because I feel like the technology has sort of gone way beyond what, in this instance, makes sense in terms of you being, beyond the novelty. So to me, if you're not using it to make decisions about people that can harm them, that's different than the way it's being used right now.
I agree. Just because you can do something, they say don't do it. So qualifies for that.
Yeah, that's the best quote. That's the best quote. So, well, thank you so much for doing this, and we'll talk next month.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.